Hey guys, Scott here. Something a bit different today. Today we're going to go over what actually makes an indie game an indie game, because there's always a lot of controversy, especially around the Game Awards, about games that win Best Indie Game of the Year that don't actually qualify for Best Indie Game of the Year. This year, 2025, Expedition 33 won Best Indie Game and Best Debut Indie Game as well, and as I definitely assumed would happen, it pissed a lot of people off. Now, the problem is we can't really come to a clear definition of what indie is. And just basing an award off of something that doesn't even have a clear definition is just doomed to breed controversy, and that's what's happening. But let's go over the shared components of an indie game that people mostly agree on. The problem, like I said, is that there's no one definition that we can all agree on, but there are several key components that a lot of these definitions share. They have a small budget. Their company is kind of small in terms of number of employees, and they typically have no external publisher of any kind. The problem is, if you go to show examples of these three, you can show clear exceptions to all of these categories. So there's nothing that fits all of these perfectly. So really what happens when we're talking about indie games is we kind of just go off of vibes. And again, basing an award off of vibes, I don't think is a good idea. But let's just look at a couple of examples. The game Journey is what you would call an indie game. It's short, experimental, it has a small team, it tells a very different story from most games, it's extremely unique, and so most people consider Journey to be an indie game. But by all definitions, it's not an indie game. Even though the team is small, they had significant funding from Sony, and Sony published their game. So it would not fit one of the main criteria of what is determined to be an indie game. Dave the Diver is another example. It's one of those games where you look at it and vibes-wise, you're like, oh yeah, that's an indie game. It's got the 2D elements. It's just when you look at it, you go, oh yeah, that's an indie game. But again, it had funding by Nexon. This is not what you would consider to actually be legally an indie game, and yet most people kind of argue about that stuff. That's the problem here. The problem is we go off of vibes alone and not what the actual criteria is. The problem with that is the criteria itself is extremely hard to be specific about. Let's start with the first one, small budget. The game has a small budget, it's an indie game. Well, that isn't necessarily true. It can have a small budget but still be produced by Electronic Arts, which is a massive game company, AAA game company and publisher. It doesn't necessarily mean that they gave tiny amounts of funding to it, that it's suddenly an independent game. For example, if a small Electronic Arts game gets, $1 million in funding, but a crowdsourced random Kickstarter game gets $2 million in funding, would you say the Electronic Arts game is now the indie game and the other one isn't? Of course not. So small budget is not really a specific factor of indie games at all. Well, what about a small company? Just a handful of people working on a game? But again, how do you determine what that number is? What's the cutoff for a small amount of people? Is it 1 people? Is it 5? Is it 30? Does Clair Obscur Expedition 33 count with its roughly 33 employees? Most people would say no, because then they go, oh man, but you look at the credits for Expedition 33, it's not just 33 people. There's 100 more people for localization and, marketing and blah, 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 and all these other employees. And that's true, but those people are technically not employees of the company. It's very interesting. You'll see people complain about that and then say Silksong should have won Best Indie Game or something like that. But then you look at the credits for Silksong, a company, but Team Cherry has 3 employees, but there's 100 people in those credits too. That's just how games work. Even if you have a core studio that's very small, they always outsource help. That would be like if I said I'm an employee of Twitch or I'm an employee of YouTube. I'm neither of those things. I'm technically an independent contractor for the companies, and I don't actually work for them. I just make money from them. So that's not really a good way to go about describing it either. Then we have the no publisher discussion. And the truth is, most indie games do have a publisher. Even if they're very small games, it is extremely rare to have one guy make a game and just upload it to Steam. I did that, but my game is a piece of shit. That doesn't really count as the standard indie game experience here. So most indie games do have a publisher of some kind. But then you have to go, okay, what is the thing about the publisher that makes it not indie? For example, if someone were to, like I said before, raise, $10 million on Kickstarter, that's an insanely good amount of money for a small game. So that would technically be raising money from a lot of people. It's crowdsourcing money, but there's no publisher. But it has a budget of 10 million. What if there was a huge company that published a game, but they only gave them, $1 million for it? The Kickstarter game, which is not funded by anybody, has vastly more money than the company, the publishing company, that gave someone money. So my point really comes down to, what is the difference? If they make $10 million from, 1,000 people, or they make $10 million from one company, they're still receiving external funding from other things. Where do you draw the line? It has like tiers. What if like one guy wants to make a game, but he takes a loan out from his bank? That means he's using money that he doesn't technically have. So he's being funded by something there. You take it to the next level, and that's like Kickstarter. The next level is a company like Kepler Interactive, which basically is a company that feeds money to indie companies. So they're not really like Electronic Arts. They just give money to, smaller indie-based companies. Then the next level is like an actual publishing company. Like, there's so many tiers to this. The point is, where do you draw the line? Like, how do you actually determine which of these things is indie and which is not? Another just random example. What if Elon Musk decided he was going to make a video game and he hired 4 people, 2 artists and 2 programmers, and then he, just as contracted work, not as employees in his company, he hired every A-list actor on the planet to voice act. He hired, 100 actors. He spends $150 million on the game by himself, but it's just him and 4 other people. And he publishes the game, and that game wins Best Indie Game of the Year. You think people will go, well, yeah, a little up-and-comer Elon Musk. Yeah, no, he deserved that. That was a really, really good attempt at making a game from him in a small company like that. No, people will be pissed the fuck off. The whole point is, you can poke holes in every one of these definitions and find an example and a counterexample every single time. So it really boils down to the fact that we are really just going off of vibes here. When you look at something, you can typically tell, oh yeah, that's indie. But even then, it's not crystal clear. Because if you look at a game like Silksong, you look at that game and go, yep, that's an indie game. Absolutely. Super high quality, amazing game, but that's an indie game. Team Cherry, only 3 employees. What funding do they have? The truth is, a lot of funding. Hollow Knight sold over 15 million copies. Amongst 3 employees. Obviously, they have to pay contracted work too, but spread amongst 3 employees, they probably had a shit ton of money going into Silksong to actually finish this game. So they had a bunch of funding already. Like, there's always an exception and there's always a hole to be poked. So that's why I don't really understand all of the outrage about Expedition 33 winning Best Indie Game, because they technically fit the main definitions here. I think the problem is, for a lot of people, they don't fit the vibes of the actual award or the classification of indie. They don't fit the vibes because it's like an Unreal Engine 5 game that has a typical Unreal 5 sheen, and for some reason people associate Unreal Engine with not indie, as if that makes any sense whatsoever. The truth is, if you look at the list for the Game Awards for 2025 for Best Indie Game, almost all of them don't actually qualify for every single definition of what makes an indie game. And that's the whole point I'm trying to make here. We're all fighting over something that has no clear definition to begin with. For every time you could say, well, Expedition can't win because of X, you could say, well, Silksong can't win either then because of Y. Or Dispatch actually had a huge budget too. Or, you can just make a counter argument every single time. The whole point here is these conversations are pointless. The whole idea is this is just vibes based, and frankly, I think they should just do away with indie game awards in general or separate them. Make it like best low budget game, because I think that's really what people want to see when they talk about an indie game winning. They want to see a low budget game come out on top and be displayed in the prestigious game awards. That's the main feeling people are looking for. They don't want to see EA win an award. They don't want to see, a major company. They don't want to see Blizzard win an award. They want to see some young up-and-comer get that trophy, and that's a feel-good story. That's what they want. So I think we should just make it low budget. Make it low budget underdog story award or whatever. That would piss a lot less people off than trying to divvy up the millions of definitions of what actually makes an indie game an indie game. But if I were to try to really define the feeling of an indie game, to me, it's when an external force, usually financially speaking, did not have any impact on the creative vision of the game. That is as succinctly as I can put my definition of an indie game. It is a game in which the developers had their vision, executed their vision, and there wasn't a shareholder going, can't do that. That's, I think, what we are really looking for. And that's why we really appreciate what the Baldur's Gate 3 director said when he said, no game that's going to be amazing is going to be influenced by these external forces. It's going to be people that have a vision, execute their vision, and release their vision, and that's it. That's what we're looking for. But by then you could say, hey, well then Larian is a indie game company as well because they publish their own stuff and they started like that too. But now they have too many employees, so then you go into, well, too many employees. Well, that's a factor too, and we're just going in circles again. So what's the point? The point is, it's vibes based. I think the award in general is stupid. All it does is serve to piss people off. Make one new category for best low budget or underdog story or something like that, and then just do away with the rest because frankly, it's just too damn hard to define. That's it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.